Welcome everyone to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really interesting guest here with Robert Nicklin. Now, Robert, I'm going to ask the permission to call you Rob, but formally you're now an author and I want to give you that status. You just are publishing the book, The Growth Code. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. You are a chief growth officer and I want to hear a little bit more about that as well. But we're going to be talking about what you wrote in that book and how you apply it on a daily basis. What does the growth code mean? And I think you put it in terms like why judgment is the new competitive advantage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're going to dig into that big time, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background, but I know you started out early in your career as a fitness trainer and coach. You learned a lot there. I want to learn a little more about what you learned there in behaviors and working with people, because that's a big part of the growth code.
Absolutely.
But you moved on, and an interesting transition. All of our careers go like this these days, right?
Yeah.
Into operations and into sales. And now you're the chief growth officer, right? At Compass Group. What I'd love to do is kind of take us along that journey a little bit, explain a little bit more about your background, and then we're going to dive into the growth code.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah. Probably some of the things that probably not a lot of people know about me is I did start my career in fitness as a former personal trainer and coach, even down as much as coaching my son's soccer team at the weekend. And I've coached other teams growing up through the years. And probably what I realized, or I've come to realize later in my career, Steve, that I kind of was formulating those ideas, those understandings way back 25, 30 years ago, is that exercise, like commercial sales or enterprise growth, it all comes back down to behavior. And so even though I spent the last 25 years in more of an enterprise sales environment and now into the role I'm in now as chief growth officer with Compass Canada, I think what I learned in the very early stages was just that, like now, revenue follows behavior. Any outcome that we want to measure is based on the action. And so I think really what the growth code has become now is a collective of knowledge and understanding on really what I like to say is why people do what they do the way they do it, and try to put all that into all those kind of life lessons, if you will, into one place that I'm excited to be sharing with my co-author, Leslie Everett.
I love this, the way you phrased that, and I wrote it down, revenue follows behavior. There's a lot of talk about optimizing for revenue, but if we optimize for the right behaviors, the revenue will follow. I think that's a really important lesson as we get into this. Explain a little bit more. Expand on the revenue follows behavior. Explain that connection to us, if you could, to start out.
In sales, or I would say generally in life, if you think about something that you want to change, I would say most people, whether they're listening to the podcast or we're all sitting at home at any given point, there's something that we would always want to change about ourselves. And there's no lack of motivation in people that I've understood. And one of the modules inside the growth code framework within the book is the behavior change model, and helping people to understand how change actually comes about. And so I think because I've been able to be part of and witness and help so many other people, I've recognized later in my career that rather than chasing growth as a number, what you've actually got to do is invest in the people that create the number of itself. And so you can always look at the difference between a leading indicator is all the effort and the lagging indicators is the outcome. So one of the principles in the growth code is action is effort and outcomes are the evidence. And I think I've generally lived my life that way, whether it be on the gym floor, selling, or just in terms of personal growth and developing people. And so it really all disseminates in that philosophy, Steve, which is action is effort and the outcomes are the evidence of that.
So I love that. So the actions, like words are cheap, actions aren't, right? That's the difficult part. And I had a 4-time B2B CMO about a year ago on the podcast. And she said, Steve, she goes, there's only one thing I want to talk about in your podcast. I'm like, okay, well, what's that? She said, I want to talk about execution, right? Where all good strategy goes to die, right? It's really the execution and putting it into the hands of the teams that execute. High performance teams and those people are what make high performance companies. And so I know it's a big part of this is human behavior. And I'd like to break that down into how do you work with the humans as part of this equation? We keep talking about AI, and I could talk about AI every single podcast. Believe me, I can make it the central point of every podcast. right? But what I love is your focus on the behaviors of the human behaviors. The AI and the strategy, everything that we do is to create better responses, which are the behaviors of the audience that we're trying to influence. And so you talked up front about why judgment matters so
Mm,
much in
yeah.
this. And I wanted to give you a chance to explain what you meant by that.
Yeah, honestly, I think judgment in the future world, Steve, I think is going to become the competitive advantage for people. We are living in a world where there's no shortage of information. In fact, one of the things I like to say quite often is it's not about what you know, it's what you do with that knowledge. And more importantly, how you use it to help others. In my early career, when I think back, what separated you as a good salesperson was you were the information carrier. The more information you had, that created the point of differentiation. Now everyone's got access to the same information. So what actually becomes the point of differentiation is your ability to be able to interpret that information with good judgment. One of the things that we've got to continue to focus on as leaders is understanding what's going to separate leaders from today for tomorrow is how they interpret data, but more importantly, Steve, how they do it under pressure when the stakes are high and you've got multiple pieces of information. How do you make sure that you're acting in the right way with the right information that you're getting and that the information you're getting is accurate? I think the judgment part is probably going to become one of the biggest competitive advantages in business.
Oh my gosh, I have to tell you this. So I
Yeah.
was doing some deep research on Claude the other day
Okay.
around prompting because MIT, their Sloan School, came out with a big study and they said that with the new models that keep coming out, half of the value from these models is not the
Hmm.
model itself. It's what goes into the model,
Right. Right.
right? And that the pattern that Claude sees is that the prompts that go into the models have two of the six inputs that are needed. And they
Yeah.
talked about how AI then has a capability to help the user that has the right judgment is the word that it used,
Yeah.
that the AI could bring in the reams, the unlimited amount of data that no human could keep track of in their brains, but pair it up with the human judgment.
Yeah.
And that is the equation to create in that environment, right? Create the right prompts. And
Totally.
and and that seems to be like all of our go-to-market teams are on AI. They're prompting to do the workflows and the
Mhm.
outputs that they need to be the part of the engine that's going forward, right? So
Mhm.
it just triggered on me. I didn't even realize that. Claude used the word human judgment. And so I just wanted to underscore what you're saying there in terms of the importance of that,
Yeah.
right? That's a competitive advantage. Basically, Claude sees it that way too.
That's
So
true.
how do we foster that judgment? Because I don't think we can just say it's a given, right? Because we're all human, we all have good judgment, and
Yep.
everybody in our team is going to have good judgment and make all the right calls, and we're all headed in the right direction. Like, how do you, as a chief growth officer, foster judgment inside of an organization in the right ways?
Yeah, I think questioning is one of the biggest things. Whenever I get asked in the business, Rob, what is the one or two or three things that we can do to improve? Honestly, Steve, the answer comes back to the same thing. It's just ask better questions and more of them. And I think it's no different to creating better. It's kind of the reverse side, isn't it? If you want better access to information coming from AI, you've got to prompt better and learn how to prompt. If you want to be able to make a better judgment call, you've got to know how to better ask better questions so that the information you're able to make a decision on, especially under pressure, especially when the stakes are the highest. Because as I said, I think in today's modern world, there's no shortage of information. The competitive advantage for the leader is going to be not the person that can consume more knowledge, it's the person that can actually think better. I think that's going to be the key thing. You've got access to the same thing. Who can think better, ask better questions to validate and create quicker, faster, more meaningful outcomes?
Really interesting. So, judgment isn't just deciphering and making a decision about all these
Mm.
things that are in front of me. It's the good judgment to be knowing what are the right questions that are going to get me the right information, right? I had another chief growth officer on, and she was talking about how we've got to be in the right rooms at the right times, asking the right questions.
Yep.
And we don't really think that way. We have our commercial go-to-market process and it runs the way that it runs. And we have conversations that are naturally happening, but we're not thinking about, there's another big line of thinking these days that in the B2B world is as B2B buyers are waiting longer and longer to want to talk to us. And they've locked the short list. They've got 4 to 5 vendors that they're reviewing, that they are in validation mode when they're talking to the sales organization. At the beginning, where they're deciding, hey, this is a big problem. We are having a big challenge. How big of a deal is this? Do we need to put resources to it? How timely is this? Do we need to assign a budget? They go through a lot of thinking up front before they lock the short list. And that's what this other CRO and I were, or CGO and I were talking about, was that we got to get into the right rooms, asking the right questions at the right times when those kind of conversations are happening, and be that right kind of partner. So what I'm taking away is judgment isn't just about assessing well what's in front of us. It's also judging how we get the right information, who we're talking to, so that we're getting the right information at the same time. Is that a good takeaway?
Yeah. And not to pile on to what you were saying, but I think one of the other things that is, statistically, there's a lot of data out there that the human brain is faced with over 2 million pieces of information coming at it in any given moment in time. And generally, the human brain deletes, distorts, or generalizes that information. And imagine now, again, as you just, all the things you just rightly said, you're now adding another layer of information coming at you with, whether it's true, if it's not, is validated. And so I think that's how our isms and biases are created, because we've either generalized, distorted, or deleted information that's coming at us. I think taking time to slow down and really look at what's in front of us, I think, is also the biggest thing. So you can make the right decision. Again, right room, right person, right deal. I think all the things that you just absolutely just said.
So I want to talk about, you mentioned a term that is observational intelligence and reading what isn't being said.
Yeah.
And how important that is. So tell me more.
I think one of the biggest things, I think this is probably post-COVID as well, Steve. It probably goes back to post-COVID, that the more further removed we've become from being all together collectively. I think one of the things that I've noticed, certainly, and I ultimately encourage as much as I can, is getting people back together. Not because I think that there's, yes, the human connection, and that's all very important, but what we're removing is the observational learning, to the point you just made quite rightly, which is what is happening that's not being said? How do we spot those moments of the behavior that shows up when people in a room aren't speaking, who's afraid to speak, who comes forward, those frowning moments, those lean in moments, or those, more importantly, those lean away moments. For me, observational learning is a big part of that, from an understanding of, again, reading the room. And I don't want to go off tangent, but I've got a really great example, which I put in the book, which is a case study. When I first took over a big new job when I was young, I got over promoted into a position in my first one in hospitality. And I remember walking into this kitchen of this beautiful big 4-star hotel, and we had free lunches at the time. And the perfect example of this is, and I was asking where the food was, 1,000-seat wedding going on. And the head chef turned around very quickly, goes, "Oh, you want staff lunch?" I was like, "Yeah." And he literally threw this plate of food across the kitchen at me. He goes, "There's your lunch." And that for me is about knowing what's happening in the room, not what's on the agenda. For me, it was about the food, and for everything else that was going on. So I think that situational, that observational learning, just be aware of what's going on, the stuff that isn't being said. And I use that as an example because that was a very humbling experience that I share in the book and has stayed with me for a long time. And I try to use that to just reinforce the observational learning that's so important nowadays when you get people together.
What a great lesson in life.
Yeah,
There's a plate coming at your head.
Here you go. Big plate of spaghetti. You can imagine how humble I was going to this day.
One of the dynamics that all of this is happening within today is, call it a pressure cooker, whatever. Things are happening faster than ever. Every C-level executive that comes onto this podcast, I ask the question, what are your 2 greatest challenges for creating long-term sustainable growth? More and more, I'm getting answers about keeping up, keeping pace, keeping ahead of the competition in a world where, with AI coming in and everything, everything is happening so quickly. We're under pressure more than we ever have been before. And How do we adapt to that environment? And how does that play into what you're talking about and what we need to be doing as a result and acknowledge that's the atmosphere that we're in today?
I think first and foremost, pressure reveals behavior. It's what gets noticed when everything's fine or not. How does behavior under pressure actually adjust, to your point, the need of more adaptability? I think for the longest time, Steve, you go back the last 10, 20 years, everybody knows what IQ is. It's what you're born with. And then there was this big explosion on EQ, and everyone had to be more emotionally intelligent. Okay, all right, we're more emotionally intelligent. And IQ and EQ, that's what you to scale you. As we continue to see such changes in the world we're in, and obviously with AI as well, you've got to look at all of the factors of intelligence that make a big part into the adaptability, the word you use. Something we talk about in the growth code. It's called the intelligence seesaw. And if you think of the fulcrum being cultural intelligence, certainly in the enterprise world, you can show up to people's meetings virtually or in person, and you don't necessarily know who you're meeting or what age, race, religion, ethnic background they're from. And having a very strong understanding of cultural intelligence is critical, which is why it's the fulcrum. And then when you think about how do you use that balance, IQ, yes, is important, EQ, yes, and your SQ in terms of your ability to be able to move around in a room. But the most important thing is now is to be able to pivot in the moment. Understand again with the observational learnings, with the information that we now have available to us in abundance, how are you adapting in those moments in real time when the situation is changing or something is coming at you? I think the single biggest skill going forwards, coupled with observational learning, is adaptability under pressure. And we all face it, but it's how does that show up? In what ways do we need to start being able to use it? And I really think that under high pressure situations, I think the people that can learn to understand adaptability as an intelligence are the ones that I think they're going to have the biggest success going forward. I really do.
I used to have this boss talk about the story, right? So I had this boss, and he always say, a system under pressure reveals its flaws. And I would
Yep.
always think of like a pipe, like in your house, that when it got too much pressure, it would like maybe if the pipes froze or something, it would burst and it would burst at a
Yep.
seam, right? It would reveal the flaw
Right.
at that moment. And what
100%.
I'm thinking about is what you're saying here is that we really need to think about we can't just say, okay, we know things are happening faster. We have to actually have a plan to adapt to that environment. And if we don't have a plan to adapt to that environment, then we're just going to be a system that's under pressure that just starts revealing all of our flaws. What do we have to do to adapt? If adaptability is a key today, what do we need to learn from that? What do we need to take away from what you're saying?
Honestly, I think it starts with self evaluation, Steve. Most importantly, I think it's about how are you evaluating or who else are you leaning on to help evaluate you on your most difficult days, not just your easy ones. I think you've got to be open to feedback. You've got to be open to advice, and you've got to allow people trusted close to you in those moments of pressure to help you understand how you're showing up. For me, adaptability is the intelligence of the modern leadership world. I really do. That is going to be the thing that scales a great leader in today's world is their ability to adapt on the most difficult days where you really have to take those moments to self-evaluate. How did I show up? I call this the weather in the room. What is the weather you set in the room? Because you're responsible for the weather in every room you walk into. I really believe that. And I think that's a big part of it. How, when you walk in, how do you use that immediate moment to adapt in the environment you're in? So I think adaptability as an intelligence that modern leadership is critical. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Everything you're talking about, adapting behaviors, judgment. There is a individual level, but collectively we have to operate as a team. And that team has to be aligned. At some point, this adaptability and this judgment has to come together to align us as an organization and these individual teams that are the high performance teams that we know are the ones that make high performance businesses. In terms of team alignment and building growth,
Mhm.
and building trust within that team and externally, like how do you align people with this philosophy we've been talking about? How does it come into alignment so that companies can use this to grow?
First of all, I think it comes back down to I look at trust as emotional harmony in the workplace. That's what I would say. Do people generally believe they're in a position to be able to speak the truth? We talk about show up as your authentic self, but do we really mean it? Are you in a place to want to receive feedback? That's actually that's a big question as a leader. If I'm going to give you feedback, are you in a place to receive it? And if so, then how do we help make sure that we've got a path to be able to help support that? So I think trust itself is about emotional harmony. What I realized, Steve, as I've got older and I would like to think wiser in my years, I kind of learned that on the gym floor in my early 20s. I would have people come to me of all different ages, typically very older, and trust that they're putting in their greatest fear. A, they don't want to be there. B, they're wearing clothes they don't want to be in. They're having to face into some kind of a superficial body image that they think they should be, but they're not. And I think what I did then, which I've been able to kind of, again, talk about in the book and bring it forward, which is creating a safe space for people. And it's focusing on what I love to talk about is it's about what's right, not who's right. And I think in business, that is what creates trust. It's not when you're in a meeting, who's right, who's got the loudest voice. It's about what's right for this moment and how to move us forward. When you can create that type of environment centered on emotional harmony, psychological safety, those two things run simultaneously, then I think, again, behaviorally, when you make those conversations available, when you make that room available for people to speak, that immediately builds trust, and trust becomes behavioral, and that becomes repeatable. And that's what people observe. And so I think that for me is one of the biggest things I work very hard to establish. Again, I think something that I was very fortunate to have learned before I even realized what I was being taught from my early career.
And doesn't that transition, that's not only building trust internally, doing what's right in the moment at that time, that's what our clients want from us too,
Oh,
right? I
I
mean, that's
think,
not just an internal team building. And trust is so important. Before the shortlist is formed, like the day it's formed, there's 4 or 5 on there and it's set. And then 95% of the time, the winner is from that short list. And so getting on that short list is about building the trust in advance. So important to us. And everything you said, I was thinking duplicately, that makes sense internally and externally to build trust.
yeah.
And Forrester came out at the beginning of the year with their predictions for this year and talked about how trust was the currency to get into the deal, win the deal, keep the deal. The growth code, how does trust fit into how you see the growth code working?
If to paraphrase, trust accelerates execution. Once you've built trust, you have to maintain that. But I think trust is earned over time. It's not just given immediately. I would say, actually, conversely, Steve, it's probably lost over time. I'm someone who trusts immediately and then it's lost over time because you either show up, you do what you say you're going to do, you add value, and you're able to do something for someone. One of the biggest things in sales nowadays in the modern world is the role of a salesperson is to help someone move towards a difficult decision towards change. And you've got to be able to trust someone, not necessarily like someone, for them to be able to make that decision. And I think once that trust has been established, then I think it's really important. But from an organization and or within a team, when teams trust each other and organizations trust organizations, that's how you can scale success. And so I think trust for me is once built, it can absolutely accelerate execution of growth, and clients and relationships, I think, is really important.
So there's been a lot written in like that. The trust prediction from Forrester is that building trust means that you've also done the hard work, you've understood, you've worked to understand them and their industry as your buyers, and that you're coming in not just selling, but you're coming in and you have something important to say. You've proven that the call, the time that you're asking for them is worthy of them spending that time. In the shortage of access to executives and their time, we got to make the most out of it. So, is there a correlation between customer understanding and trust in your mind?
The correlation between trust and understanding is probably what becomes cultural, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what clients see. It's what they see gets recognized and rewarded. It's what your internal teams see get rewarded, especially when no one's watching. Really, what drives that is the culture. We talk about culture a lot as if it's like a slogan on the wall. But I also think the culture, Steve, comes back down to behavior. Again, everything centers back to what are you tolerating? What are you rewarding and recognizing, especially when no one's watching? Because that's what gets repeated. And clients see that, customers
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what creates that trust. And trust is what drives culture in an organization.
I ran for a long time a podcast in the HR and talent acquisition industry. And in there, I talked to a lot of CHROs and CPOs, but I talked to a lot of CEOs and chief technology officers, and everybody was talking about how the importance of culture, because we think about like attracting the right talent, that we're just going to have hordes of great people that we can choose from, but they're looking at us. And they're making a decision. Is this the right kind of company and the right kind of culture that I want to be a part of? And keeping happy our teams is such an
Yeah.
important part of delivering on that trust and that understanding. And mass turnover is not only costly from a revenue, from a financial perspective, but from a relationship perspective as well.
Yeah.
So that culture, yeah, it's way more than the plaque on the wall or the page on the website that has company values written on it, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
We've covered so much territory here that I just have to ask if there was one thing that the C-suite executives are going to be consuming this podcast that you wanted them to take away, if there was one thing you wanted them to remember, what would that be?
Good question. From my experience, I think more than anything else is growth is something that you design. It's not something you chase. And because I think everything comes back down to behavioral, Steve, I think a true growth system is built and designed. It's not something you chase. If I had another one, I would say also the greatest thing that you should be proud of as a leader is that you can actually sit back and observe leadership behaviors in others. The other key thing is once you create a growth system, then you should have people that can sit within it. And I think that's about leaders creating strong leaders who create strong leaders. And I think, yeah, they're probably my two biggest takeaways, or those aha moments of growth is designed, not something you chase, for sure.
I got to tell you, one of my biggest takeaways, and I love your takeaways there, is that we just have to work a lot harder on what can be thought of as soft skills, right? But they're
Mhm.
not. As the business accelerates and the pace accelerates and change accelerates, that those soft skills or those relationship, I put it this, put those relationship skills and judgment skills are going to be more and more important as time goes on. And that we have to be diligent about that and have a plan. So I love everything we talked about here. And I have to tell you, the whole mission of this podcast is to bring really interesting perspectives together from C-suite executives across the board, all over the world. And we learn something so much every single time. And I call it the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you were
Love it.
just an amazing part of that rising
No,
tide
I
today.
appreciate it. And listen, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and have a conversation with you. I've truly enjoyed it. If anything we shared here is inspiring or motivational, or someone else is sitting feeling with the same challenge, then that's what you hope to try and achieve through these conversations, right? Which is try to find like-minded connections or opportunities, or to solve something that someone's sitting on and think, yeah, you're not the only one dealing with the same kind of problem, and how do we solve for that for the future? So yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great. And I hope everybody has a chance to get out and grab the growth code. And thank you for coming on. Appreciate all the time.
Thank you, Steve.